Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Simple Business Talk. I'm Emma, and today we're laughing and learning. Yes, both.
Hi guys, I'm Jack, and I'm ready. I brought my water. I'm hydrated. I'm prepared to talk about startup pain.
Did you know that 90% of startups fail within their first year? But here's the twist. Most of those failures come from mistakes that nobody talks about in business school.
That's such an eye opening statistic, and what's really fascinating is how many of these mistakes are actually completely preventable.
Well, I've been analyzing startup data for years, and you know what keeps surprising me? It's not usually the big, obvious mistakes that sink companies. It's these subtle, almost invisible errors that compound over time.
Hmm. Like that case study from last month about the tech startup that raised $2 million but failed because they copied another company's business model without understanding the underlying infrastructure costs.
That's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. You know, recent research shows that about 42% of startups fail simply because there's no market need for their product. They never bothered to verify if anyone actually wanted what they were building.
Speaking of market research, like I just read about this company that spent $500,000 developing an app before doing their first customer interview.
Oh my goodness, let me guess how this ends. Did they discover that their target market had completely different needs than what they imagined?
Well, that's the thing. They found out their entire target market was already using a different solution that was deeply embedded in their workflow. The really interesting part is that according to industry data, just spending $5,000 on initial market research could have saved them from this expensive mistake.
You know what's fascinating about that? It connects directly to another major mistake we're seeing in the startup world, this tendency to grow too fast without proper foundation. The latest venture capital reports show that premature scaling is responsible for about 70% of startup failures.
That reminds me of this fascinating case from Silicon Valley last year, a startup that went from 5 to 150 employees in just 3 months.
Let me guess, they had to do massive layoffs within the year?
Even worse, they had to shut down entirely. The burn rate was so high that even their Series A funding couldn't save them. The really interesting part, a Harvard Business Review study showed that companies that scale gradually have a 250% better chance of successful growth.
And you know what makes this even more complex? The current economic climate has actually intensified these mistakes. Recent data shows that startups are making these errors at an even higher rate due to pressure to compete in an increasingly crowded market.
That's such an important point about market pressure. How do you think this relates to the whole fail fast mentality that's so popular in startup culture?
Well, here's what's fascinating about that. While fail fast is good in theory, many entrepreneurs misinterpret it. According to Startup Accelerator data, successful companies don't actually fail fast. They test fast and adapt quickly. There's a crucial difference.
That makes me think about this recent MIT study showing that successful startups make an average of 7 major pivots before finding their winning formula.
And speaking of winning formulas, let's talk about another hidden killer, the numbers blindness. You know, a recent survey showed that 82% of failed startups had no clear understanding of their unit economics.
The really shocking part about those numbers is how many entrepreneurs can't even tell you their customer acquisition cost or lifetime value metrics.
Exactly. And here's what's really interesting. According to recent research, companies that track their key metrics weekly are 3.5 times more likely to achieve successful exits.
That brings up another crucial point about competition awareness. The data shows that nearly 35% of startups fail because they ignore their competitors entirely.
You know what's particularly fascinating about competition awareness? It's not just about knowing who your competitors are, it's about understanding the market dynamics. Recent studies show that successful startups spend an average of 20 hours per month just on competitive analysis.
Well, that certainly challenges the common wisdom about just focusing on your own product and ignoring the competition.
And here's another myth we need to bust, the idea that perfect planning prevents failure. The data actually shows that businesses that launch with a minimal viable product and iterate based on feedback are 40% more likely to succeed than those that try to launch with a perfect product.
That reminds me of this fascinating case study about a startup that spent 2 years perfecting their product only to launch and find out the market had completely changed.
The timing of that example is perfect because it leads us to our final and perhaps most important point: the cost of waiting. Recent research indicates that for every month a startup delays launching, they decrease their chances of success by approximately 3.5%.
So, what would you say is the single most important takeaway from all of this data?
Well, looking at all the research and case studies we've discussed today, it's clear that success in the startup world isn't about avoiding all mistakes. It's about making small, controlled mistakes while maintaining enough runway to learn from them. The data shows that successful founders make just as many mistakes as unsuccessful ones. They just make them faster and cheaper.
That's such a powerful way to wrap up our discussion. The idea that it's not about being perfect, but about being strategically imperfect.
Exactly right. And for anyone listening who's thinking about starting a business, remember, start small, test quickly, measure religiously, and grow methodically. The data shows that's the most reliable path to success.